More than 20 people have died following attacks on churches, a synagogue, and police posts in Russia's Republic of Dagestan. Many of the dead include police officers. The BBC is reporting that 5 gunmen were also killed. 46 were also taken to hospital. Now, to chat about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, who joins us from the Foreign Desk in Los Angeles. Lisa, the coordinated attacks, nobody's really claimed responsibility yet, but do we feel that maybe it's ISIS, and ISIS is alive and well in Russia?
Well, they do believe that it is Islamist extremist. They have an issue with that in Russia right now. As we know, in the last couple of months, we had another significant attack at a concert hall that then eventually ISIS did claim responsibility for that. The reason why it would not surprise me if it were to be ISIS is that they are trying to resurface, get street credibility, obviously working that part of the world. Their fixation on churches, synagogues, police, we're seeing that here in the West. So there is a parallel there. And ISIS tries to claim responsibility whenever it can. So if there's any credit left on the table, they'll be happy to take that credit for an attack of this caliber, whether they did it or not. It points to a lot of different things. The fact that here in the West, we're seeing a lot of these, they're not really lone wolf anymore. This is what we used to call it a decade ago. Now this is more just tying themselves to different groups that have sympathy for these causes. I know you've seen all over New York, Los Angeles over the weekend, huge attacks of similar caliber of extremists dressing up like Hamas, dressing up like Hezbollah, attacking synagogues, attacking people on the streets that look like they're Jewish. It's a fixation, and it is really fixated towards, as you saw, Western elements. So in Russia, we saw police headquarters, churches, synagogues, etc. So this is something that I think is more of a global issue than our leaders would like to admit. But obviously, the terrorists are bringing our attention to it more and more.
There are also reports that Tehran-backed proxy fighters are preparing to join Hezbollah in its fight against Israel. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so this is the escalation that we have seen as of October 7th, even before October 7th. There was always Hezbollah missiles going into northern Israel. This is not something that is reported often and has been escalating since October 7th. So there has not been a full-on war or declaration of war by Israel's government, but it is only a conversation about when and not if this escalation will occur. And according to intel sources, this is imminent at this point. We're getting closer and closer to seeing that conflict really escalate to the point of a full-fledged war, probably more significant than the war that Israel is currently fighting against Hamas. And that's the scary part. So Hezbollah being the most well-endowed terror proxy of Iran's regime. And now, as we reported at the Foreign Desk, Tehran is lining up all of its proxy fighters in the region, whether they're in Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, to fight this war against Israel. They created this ring of fire around Israel with all of the Iran regime's proxies, and now it's go time for them. So this is exactly what we're seeing them do in preparation.
Does it seem like the Jewish state Israel is getting it from all sides? We're talking about Hamas, Hezbollah, and other reports that thousands of militants are preparing to enter Lebanon for the purpose of joining Hezbollah in a potential war.
Yeah, Hal, I'm going to add to your list. It's Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the mainstream media, the universities, the UN, and the list goes on. Europeans across the board, Israel finds itself in many heated conflicts, but also in the information war. There's a problem here, right? We know there's a major problem here, and I think we know enough to say that it is not just about the land, it's not about policy, it's not about the history, because people who truly understand this know how nuanced it is, and it is not, as black and white as many news channels will have you believe, or headlines, or whatever you're seeing out in the media. But it is absolutely nuanced. Israel obviously has a right to exist, but then that concept in and of itself is being called, a colonizing concept, or a racist concept, or, it's anti-Western, or it's anti-this, or it's anti-that, but it is just one thing. It's anti-Semitic. And because we're seeing so much of this, and the younger generation just picking it up without understanding any of the history or understanding any of the context, very, very dangerous. But The danger is twofold. One, that Iran's regime has found a way in the last 10 years to have enough money to put into terrorism. If you recall, the Obama administration, followed by the Biden administration, with the Trump administration in between, they're cutting off a lot of their funds, giving them billions and billions of dollars. They dedicated all of that money to terrorism and not to the people of Iran. And now this is the result. This is exactly what we're seeing. On the other end, we're seeing the information war. We're seeing the money that has been poured in. The Jews and those who support them. There are many Christians, there are many African Americans, there are many Europeans, there are countries that support them, there are South American countries that support Israel, the churches, etc. They are outnumbered by the number of useful idiots that this narrative has been able to pick up here in the West. And that is why we are seeing so much of this fighting, so much of this, quote, from the river to the sea type of slogans by, again, people who couldn't place these places on a map, but yet are entering the fight. One other thing I want to add here, Hal, is that there have been reports allegedly that that there are, quote unquote, human rights organizations that are paying these protesters good money to be out on the streets, burning Israeli flags, graffitiing, whether it's in New York or Canada or here in Los Angeles, we have a major problem as well. But it seems like there is money behind it. Again, this is what these reports allege. So that's another piece to this puzzle as well.
You know what? You're right. We're seeing a lot more anti-Israel protests in New York City, where you are in Los Angeles. Now, what's concerning is how many are carrying Hamas and Hezbollah flags and waving them at the rallies, two well-known terrorist organizations.
Right, exactly right. This has gone beyond the bold, the I don't know how you want to call it. They are so rogue now, so brazen now, as to not even care about calling it a pro-Palestinian protest. They're actually dressing up like terrorists, terror groups that are on the FTO, what the American government considers terror organization. So affiliation with these groups should lead to arrest, should lead to interrogation. But yet, again, you're seeing them on the streets. We saw them on the streets of Los Angeles just yesterday, where they were actually dressed up like Hamas and Hezbollah terrorists, holding up pictures in New York City of Hezbollah and Hamas leaders. These are the people that they're looking up to. These are the people that they want to kill and terrorize. They're not shying away from the actual narrative and calling it, for land or for water or for policies or for the Palestinian people. The bottom line is none of this is about the Palestinian people, because if it were, the number one thing protesters would be saying is to get rid of terrorism for the Palestinians, for any Arab country, for anywhere in the Middle East, for Russia, for anywhere, Ukraine, wherever it may find itself. Get rid of global terrorism, and we will not have any of these issues. When Hamas and Hezbollah, they swear to take Israel off the map, and then you find young Americans or Canadians on the streets echoing those sentiments to actually kill innocent Canadians or innocent Americans just because of the faith that they have, we have a major problem here. And as you know, Hal, it's not going to stop there. It's going to continue going through the churches, as we saw over the weekend. There have been attacks on churches. They are fixated on the Christian population. For over 2 decades, I've been covering the persecution of Christians throughout the Middle East. So imagine how brave one has to be to practice their faith in worshiping, the way that they want in the Middle East, when they know it is punishable by death. And then you have, again, these useful idiots on the streets of America and Canada having all that freedom, but yet targeting those who wish to practice a religion that they do not believe in.
And Lisa, Armenia is the latest country to recognize a Palestinian state. The new policy comes after Slovenia voted to grant full diplomatic recognition to the Palestinian Authority. Now, similar moves were done by the governments, as you mentioned earlier, talking about Europe, in Norway, Ireland, and Spain.
Yeah, well, it's no surprise that the Europeans feel this way. Anti-Semitism has been a major issue in Europe for a very long time. In the case of Armenia, I think it was a mistake. And the reason I think it's a mistake is because Armenians practice Christianity. They have an equal fight against terrorism and extremism when they are also targets of extremism in many of these Middle Eastern countries. The reason why I believe that the Armenians were quick to recognize a Palestinian state is because they have an axe to grind with Israel's government that recently normalized relations with Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan, obviously, being a sworn enemy of the Armenians, they're currently in conflict with one another. And then watching Israel trade with and normalize relations with Azerbaijan, I think this was a sore spot for Armenians. Perhaps this is what we're watching. It's not actually about Israel, but about kind of tit for tat and having that be an issue. Armenia and Israel are natural allies. I will always say that, and I think perhaps Israel should have maybe evaluated that relationship as well before dealing with Azerbaijan, or maybe dealing with them in a way that would bring in the Armenians for peace talks as well. I think it's important for Israel to keep its these normalized relationships, but in a way that is more inviting and allows many of these moderate states to come in.
A new survey says only 22% of eligible voters plan on voting in the next Iranian election, Lisa. Now, the study by the Netherlands-based Gaman Institute says more Iranians are boycotting the upcoming presidential elections.
Yeah, this is going to be a huge boycott. I think even 22% perhaps is a generous figure. The Iranian people have spoken out over the last 45 years, but more so over the last 10 or 15. We saw the Green Revolution, and more recently, we saw the Masa Amini protests that were over the death of the 22-year-old who was beaten to death because she was wearing her hijab improperly. Hal, you and I spoke about that at length a year and a half ago when that started. The Iranian people realize that this is not an election, it's a selection. When the candidates are only from a short list of clerics that have to be approved by the supreme leader, we know that those candidates are all cut from the same cloth. There's no such thing as a reformist or a hardliner. They're all hardline because they are all from the Islamic Republic and therefore will never offer the Iranian people the change that they're looking for. The Iranian people evolved towards, in their protests, in their movements, have evolved towards one message, and that is regime change. They will not go back, and they will not be appeased by any, wolf in sheep's clothing, as they have seen in the past 45 years. They've learned their lesson, and now they would like to, the only way they feel that they are expressing themselves is to boycott the election and to make it look as fraudulent as they believe it actually is.
Now, there was word that some voting booths may be set up in the United States so that Iranian expats can actually vote in this upcoming presidential election. What have you heard?
Well, as you know, the supreme leader of the regime feels very comfortable communicating on Twitter. And he has come out in the past to applaud, for example, the students who were in the encampments on college campuses. He applauded them. He called them brave. He said he's so proud of them. And juxtapose that with the Iranian college students inside Iran who have no rights to come out and speak up, or no rights to protest. They're actually thrown in jail. Their eyes are gouged out. The acid is thrown on their faces. They are executed for speaking out. So it makes sense that now they're reaching out to the expat community, believing that they have some useful idiots out in the rest of the world that are Iranian that would like to participate in their election. It just speaks to the fact that they know there will be low voter turnout, and they would like to open up voting to people outside the country as well to get more votes. But I do hope that Iranians living around the world are astute enough to stay out of this election and to allow the Iranian people at least this message to the government for a better future and for freedom for the Iranian people.
Speaking of governments, the U.S. government and China have held their first informal nuclear talks in 5 years. Now, Lisa, according to Reuters, Chinese officials told the U.S. that they're convinced that they will prevail in a conventional war over Taiwan without using nuclear weapons.
Right. This is actually a very funny, for lack of a better word, meeting because China will do what China wants. The Biden administration cannot stop them. And we know that they have marched forward and they have created a much more robust military, much more robust military apparatus in terms of weaponry, more advanced weaponry, more advanced delivery systems. That is something, and more advanced in terms of intel. Really wanting to expand and to spread, the Chinese empire. And of course, they have their sights set on Taiwan, and that's something that they have told the Biden administration quite openly. And as you said, they believe that they can defeat them. It's not it's not a question and now, they're going to be talking about nuclear weapons. Okay, but that doesn't mean that China is still not fixated on having them. So I think this is going to be yet another meeting where China tells the United States exactly what it intends to do, and the United States pretends to deliver that, proverbial slap on the wrist, and then, they shake hands and they create some sort of, Reuters AP photo moment, and then they both move on. It's crazy to think. I mean, it's scary to think, I should say, what will happen in terms of foreign policy across the board between now and our elections in November. Obviously, China invading Taiwan is very high on the list, as well as the Hezbollah Israel war, as well as Iran's regime pulling something much bigger than that, because they know they can play out the clock. Regardless of your political affiliation, when one looks at the Biden foreign policy, it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked because there is no deterrence. There is no, the message delivery system is very weak in terms of telling our friends where they stand, like Israel, in terms of delivering weapons to them, in terms of being clear about supporting them. And it has been very weak in terms of letting our enemies know where they stand, in terms of the Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas and Iran's regime. And China, of course, Russia too. So you can add a lot more to that list. So I think that is something to really focus on. I know that foreign policy isn't really a big issue when it comes to our elections here. It's not high on the list for people, and I can understand why, when there is, national security issues from the border or the economy, inflation, of course, gas prices, food prices, etc. But of course, here at the Foreign Desk, we're foreign policy all the time. I think it's very it's something of a warning for Americans and Canadians to really wake up and understand how damaging a bad foreign policy can be.
Foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, thanks so much for joining us today from the Foreign Desk in Los Angeles.
Thank you.